Hi, welcome to the Power of Words. I'm Gigi. Let's get started. All right, so let's start off with a Dilbert comic. When's the last time you saw one of those, right? So you can see that Dilbert's colleague has come into the office and said, "Come quickly. I think ASOC entered the jargon matrix." And you go into ASOC's office and see he's turned into a robot. At the end of the day, I want some actionable insights that will improve our cross-platform integration. And Dilbert's colleague says, "Can he hear us?" And Dilbert says, "Yes, but our words are just noise to him now." And isn't that kind of what happens? We get into our lingo, we get into our jargon, and before you know it, it all sounds like noise. So let's spend the next 15 minutes or less talking about how to communicate clearly with people outside of your industry who want to support your work. In case we've never met before, I go by Gigi, and I am the host of the Progressive Pockets podcast. For the past 2 years, I've responded to listener letters and provided practical suggestions on how to shop, bank, invest, and donate in a way that better reflects our societal values. In every conversation with listeners, I'm incorporating lessons from my 20 years as a consultant and more recently as an educator in the private and the public sectors. I've gone back and forth a little bit. I would describe myself as a Jane of all trades. And I also am bringing my lived experiences as a first generation American and as a refugee from Eritrea to all of these discussions. I have lived and worked in Africa, Europe, South America. I do consider Washington, D.C. to be home. And in my spare time, I am a voracious reader and a frequent host of dinner parties. Let me tell you a little bit about Progressive Pockets to give you some context for the discussion today. So there at this point are over 100 episodes of this show. It sits right at the intersection of social impact and personal finance. So it's unique in that sense. Listeners will typically describe the episodes in their reviews and in their feedback to me as being concise, practical, sometimes even funny. My goal every week is to cover questions of how we might spend, donate, and invest more in line with our values. So whatever is keeping you up at night, whether it's homelessness or the gender wage gap, or there's so many things. It turns out there are ways that we can line up what we're doing with our money on a daily basis and the type of world we'd like to help create. So the listeners are driving the show. They are submitting their questions. They are giving suggestions for future episodes. They give feedback on what they've heard. If they like it, they didn't like it, they understand it, didn't understand it. In early episodes, the listeners would call in and brag about a recent donation they had made. It was so much fun. And I'm going to be showing you some transcripts from some of those calls today, just to give a little bit of texture for the conversation. I think it might surprise you to hear how everyday people are talking about the work that you and I are trying to do on a daily basis. To tell you a little bit more about the listeners, they tend to be in this age range of about 35 to 50 or so. They tend to be highly educated, master's degrees and above. They tend to have some financial flexibility. They're spread throughout the United States. They come from all different kinds of sectors. So there are executives from different industries, Silicon Valley. There are public servants in there. There are doctors, lawyers, engineers. I've heard from startup folks. There are so many different people. What they have in common is that they're all fed up with the status quo and, for the most part, want the same things for our society. So what this means is that it's up to me to try to communicate as clearly as possible in a way that can resonate with people from so many different sectors. And that's what I really want to help you with today. Now, this is the way that we typically talk when we're in meetings, right? When we're in in our in-group discussions, we're using terms that seem really simple, like direct service, right? We know what we mean by that. We're not talking about research and advocacy. We're talking about hands-on work with specific communities. But that surprisingly doesn't always make sense to people that have never worked in the social impact sector before. Or phrases like capacity building. It sounds like it would be obvious, but I can guarantee you I have never, ever, ever heard a listener use the expression capacity building. Even terms like outcome can mean something different depending on the sector that you're from. Or sustainability. Let's talk about sustainability, right? If you are working, in past lives, I've worked in the public sector, and sustainability usually meant the ability of an organization to last, right? To sustain. Now, in other past lives, I've worked in the private sector where sustainability almost always referred to a very specific environmental lens. So you can see here that even words that seem very basic can really change the meaning depending on what sector you're from. Now, you might be looking at these terms and thinking to yourself, okay, we speak like that internally, but I would never speak externally using these terms. But is that really true? What I did was I went to a well-known foundation, looked at their website. First thing they had is what we do. And here's the very first thing that they said. They said, we uplift communities. We invest in people and places that foster meaningful bonds and help people thrive. I don't know about you, but I had no idea what this meant. So I double-clicked for more information. Here's what I found out. Empowerment for girls, ensuring that the health of girls around the world is cared for and that they have the essentials needed to thrive. So there's a little more clarity, but I still don't quite know what they mean. You can imagine that when we talk about the health of a person, depending on your sector, that could mean something very different. If you talk to a financial planner, your health is probably your financial health. Do you have access to emergency savings? Do you have retirement savings? If you're talking to someone from the, let's say a physician, they would be thinking more about your biological health. But if you talk to someone coming from the field of psychology, health might really be about mental health. So we can see here that we're not learning much more here. When they say cared for, I'm not sure exactly what that means. When they say the essentials needed to thrive, I'm not clear. So I double-clicked again, and here's what I found out. We have supported menstrual health education for 2,500 girls, addressing critical needs and contributing to long-term sustainable solutions in their lives. So, okay, menstrual health education, we're getting a little more clarity. When they say supported the education, I would love to know, does that mean that they conducted the workshops? Did they provide the research? Did they provide the instructors? Did they pay for the workshops? What does it mean? When they say addressing critical needs, what is that? Contributing to long-term sustainable solutions. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that the education is sustainable in that it's kind of a one and done? This girl will know everything she needs to know as she progresses through the life cycles? Or does it mean that she received products that are reusable? We just don't know. I want to contrast this with how everyday people talk about this same exact type of work. So I'm going to show you now some transcripts from some of those early callers to the show so that you can see for yourself some of the big differences in communication styles. Here's a transcript. It has not been altered at all. And I'm going to bold some of the words that kind of jumped out at me. So this person says, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, I felt compelled to donate. So already we see they're using the word donate. They're not saying contribute. They're not saying invest. They're not saying support. They're saying I donated. To grassroots organizations who are focusing on social justice, reform, and also organizations who are organizing in their respective communities. She talks about coming in contact with someone in Philadelphia and a Black woman who was collecting funds to help transgender men and women who were either affected by Corona and had lost their jobs or needed money to buy groceries, pay rent, or anything else that they need. So it's very specific, it's literal, it's direct. There's absolutely no jargon, no lingo whatsoever. Let's go to another transcript. Again, let's bold the words that kind of jump out here. So here, this was a man that was describing an organization that provides emergency shelter, long-term housing, access to lawyers, counseling, a place to relocate. They give them money to purchase food. All of this so that the women can have comfort and security and then transition to safer living environments. Again, there's no lingo here. It's very clear exactly what this organization is doing. He never says they do direct services to improve the capacity building of this community, right? Let's just do one more really short, and let's bold again the words that jump out. She says, they focus on access to therapy for communities that I feel don't get enough support, Black and brown, queer and trans communities. So they do a lot of work reimagining what masculinity is, decolonizing the way we look at ourselves, and providing therapists with that kind of training. I just think it's really wonderful that I have the opportunity to put my money where my ethics are, and that's why I donate. So it's very specific. She says, let me tell you about this organization. They provide access to therapy, and then they provide training so that therapists can be more culturally competent for a very specific overlooked community. And then she says at the end, I love that I have this opportunity to put my money where my ethics are. So this is how everyday people are talking about that same exact work. What I'd like to do now is to go back to that foundation's words and see if we can better reflect the language that everyday people are using. Let's do that. So let's parse out what they said. This is the original text from the foundation. And you can see, let's highlight some of the words that can probably be improved. Okay, so rather than health of girls, cared for essentials, let's be a little bit more clear. So now we have an improved text which says, ensuring that girls around the world understand their periods and have the menstrual supplies they need. We have provided menstrual health classes and reusable products for 2,500 girls. There's a huge difference. And this better reflects the type of language that everyday people use when they're describing the exact same work. So when in doubt, I want to give you just 3 simple steps to help improve your communication. The first step is to just write it the way that you think. Do a brain dump. If you're preparing for a presentation, a meeting, a phone call, just write it out exactly the way that you think about it. There's going to be lingo, there's going to be jargon, that's okay. In the second step, I want to encourage you to translate it for someone who comes from a different industry. For example, a world-class pastry chef. What I like about picking a specific avatar like that is it reminds us that depending on the industry you come from, different words might mean different things. For example, we talked about sustainability earlier. Sustainability to a pastry chef is probably going to mean something pretty specific and different than what another person might think sustainability means. So I want to encourage you to pick a specific avatar. And then finally, I want to encourage you to check periodically for trendy or outdated language, just to make sure that things aren't getting stale, because, the language changes all the time. All right, so I hope that we can keep the conversation going. I would love to. You can contact me anytime at progressivepockets.com. You can fill out the contact form, or you can send me an email anytime, progressivepockets@gmail.com. Progressive Pockets is available pretty much everywhere that you get your podcasts. You might want to sign up for the newsletter. In 2 years, no one has ever unsubscribed from the newsletter. That has to be a record, right? So that's all from me today. I want to thank you for joining me. I really hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and let's talk again soon.